Start there, because now you have a roadmap for supplementing. Do I need methylfolate? Do I need a certain form of B12? Do I need a B complex, zinc, magnesium? Do I need things like SAMe? And if you just give the body the raw material it needs to do its job, magic things happen.
So tell me about your ability to predict life expectancy. I mean, this is something that you've done professionally for some time. And I know that you've done it for Dana White, which is sort of like this lore that has permeated the internet at this point. A lot of people are like, oh my God, how does he do it?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start there.
You know, it's funny. I get a lot of flack for that, because people are like, well, if you could predict death, to the month, you'd be Jesus Christ, or you would have won a Nobel Prize. And the truth is, it's not my science. It's not me personally predicting death. I mean, there are mortality models, and it's some of the most accurate science in the world. And if you look at the tens of billions of dollars of financial services instruments that are actually based on when someone's going to die, annuities, reverse mortgages, life insurance, in these kinds of financial transactions, only one thing matters, right? How many more months does this person have left on earth? And when you talk about an insurance company taking $25 million or $50 million worth of risk, they're taking that risk on a single variable. And I talk about how accurate that science is. I mean, when you look at what happened in the 2008, 2009 financial services crisis, we had 364 banks, I think, fail. Not a single life insurance company failed. In fact, if you look at the debacle at AIG, where the credit derivatives side of the business almost took the whole company down, it was the life insurance side that bailed them out. And they're very solvent. A valid life insurance claim has never failed to have been paid in America. Interesting fun fact about life insurance is that 98% of all life insurance policies lapse.
Interesting.
Only 2% of life insurance policies pay a death claim.
Wow.
But even with that kind of ratio, they're very, very good at predicting mortality, and mainly because they have data that no other enterprise has. And that is that, they know the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for hundreds of millions of lives. And when you have that big pool of data and you draw from the expiration, we used to call it the maturity date. We wouldn't say that people were dying, they were maturing. And you pull back into the medical record, you can look at the trajectory of certain pharmaceuticals, chemicals, compounds, the long-term impact of relatively innocuous conditions like mild anemia, D3 deficiency, poor liver function. Now they're starting to look at things like methylation pathways, right? How well the body converts nutrients. But one of the things that we realized, and it wasn't just me doing a life expectancy, just to be perfectly clear. And a life expectancy, if I did a life expectancy on you, it doesn't mean that in 222 months, you're going to drop dead, if that's your life expectancy. What it means is at 222 months, based on a pool of 1,000 lives of your similar mortality profile, what is the mean life expectancy? So if that number is 262 months, that means at 262 months, you have the exact same chance of being alive as you do of being dead.
Yeah, you're talking, it's probability.
Yeah, it's a probability. And the probability is extraordinarily accurate. And, the sad thing about this science is that I really feel like if the mortality space, if those databases and that information could see the light of day, I really think that it would upend modern medicine in a way that would be just catastrophic, right? We would see the downside in the food pyramid. We would see the true risks of things like long-term statin use and use of blood pressure control medication and the level of medical misdiagnosis. And I hate getting on podcasts and sounding like I'm anti-big pharma, because I'm not, or I'm anti-modern medicine, because I'm definitely not. I'm not even licensed to practice medicine. I'm a human biologist. I have a vast respect for people that have gone to school and actually are licensed to practice medicine, and 99% of them got into it for the right reason. And they're doing it to change humanity, to really heal people. But then they get into a system that doesn't really support that outcome, which is why the frustration level with a lot of practitioners is just, parabolic.
Yeah.
And when you look at the science of mortality, we add up a credit and debit system. And basically, so things like type 2 diabetes, morbid obesity, hypertension, severe elevations in certain types of cholesterol. And then we also look at the impact that certain pharmaceuticals have, because when you get on certain chemicals, synthetics, and pharmaceuticals, you're essentially borrowing from your future, right? The question is, what are you borrowing, right? And you may be borrowing from your cholesterol. You may borrow from your life expectancies because you downregulate hormone metabolism. You downregulate the capacity to build cell walls and cell membranes. And this has consequences down the road. And my whole message is one about, not about not taking pharmaceuticals or not, going to your physician, and certainly not having, good family medicine practitioner look after your family. The message is that we're not as sick as we think we are. We're not as diseased as we think we are. We have accepted such an erosion of our baseline sense of normalcy as a society, right? We think that we're supposed to live with weight gain and water retention and brain fog and poor sleep and lack of focus and concentration. And we think it's normal to get a great idea in the bedroom and walk to the kitchen and wonder what the hell we're doing in the kitchen, right? We think that it's normal just to be sleep disrupted. We think it's normal to be, tired all the time. We think it's normal to be irritable, to not be able to experience elevated emotional states for prolonged periods of time. And none of that is true, right? Human beings are more like plants than we think we are, meaning that when the soil is deficient, you get the expression of those deficiencies in that tree or that bush or that shrub. And most of us are walking around with nutrient deficiencies, and they have the expression of disease: hypertension, hypothyroid, poor focus and concentration, lack of short-term recall. And if we could start hunting for those deficiencies and replace them, this is when human beings thrive, right? We don't thrive off of chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals. We don't thrive off of things we make in a lab. We don't thrive from things that are not readily available on the surface of the earth and found inside of all kinds of, some rare Amazon root that only one company has discovered, right? That they dug deep down in the soil and they skinned it and boiled it and dried it, and this is the elixir of life, right? It's found in the basics, and we've gotten so far away from the basics. Sunlight, grounding, breathing, challenging our bodies. A response in human beings called hormesis, right? Which is where you put a stress on the body and it strengthens, right? I believe that aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. And we so aggressively pursue comfort now that we accelerate aging in the process.
It's so true. I mean, disease is not caused by a deficiency of pharmaceuticals.
No. If you've got ADHD, you're not deficient in Adderall.
Right.
Right? I mean, if you have hypertension, you're not missing a beta blocker.
Right. Heart disease is not caused by a deficiency of statin drugs.
Right. And so
it's not to say that these drugs aren't helpful in certain settings,
it's
right?
It's very true. And again, I don't want to come off as like this non-physician from outer space that's here to attack modern medicine. And, my shtick is that, don't go see your doctor. That's not at all what the message is about. Look, if I hit a windshield at 20 miles an hour, I want a surgeon.
Yeah.
And I want painkillers, and I'm going to the ER if I get pain down the left side of and I'm going to do whatever the hell they tell me to do. I have 22 full-time clinicians that work for me full-time, and they are licensed to practice medicine. And I think that, if anything, the pandemic, no matter what side of that you fall on, pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, pro-masking, anti-masking, all these different things that really just sort of divide humanity. Whatever side of that equation you fall on, I don't think anyone disagrees with, listen, we have a responsibility to take the best care of ourselves, because I promise you, we can rely more on what God gave us than what man makes us. And the people that were immunocompromised, that were deficient in vitamin D3, had higher rates of mortality. I think D3 deficiency was the second leading cause of morbidity in COVID, right? So there's a deficiency that's leading to immunocompromisation, causing people to be immunocompromised. And that lack of ability to defend themselves left them susceptible to, viral pathogens and their consequences. And so, the message is about getting back to the basics, supplementing for deficiency, not just the sake of supplementing, self-care.
Yeah.
And
I totally agree. And vitamin D deficiency is also related to, it's like one of the few micronutrients that has a strong supporting body of evidence in the setting of autoimmunity. If you're deficient in vitamin D, your immune system goes haywire to the degree that in many people, it begins to attack the host.
Yeah, well, just think about it this way. There's hundreds of vitamins in your bloodstream right now, hundreds, if I pulled your blood. But you're only capable of making one. Your body only makes a single vitamin on its own, and it's vitamin D3, without supplementation, without diet, without anything. We make it from sunlight and cholesterol. And so just think for a moment how important that nutrient must be to human function if it's the only one that we make. So when God designed us, he designed us with the ability to make one vitamin. There's scantly a single cell in the human body. There are a few, but there are scantly a single cell in the human body that lacks a receptor for this vitamin.
It's also
it acts more like a hormone.
It's a hormone. Yeah, there's no other vitamin that I can think of that is a hormone in the body.
It's a calcium transport molecule. I mean, it just does so much. And because ancestrally we were meant to spend more than 85% of our time outside, and we spend more than 95% of our time inside, we just have clinical deficiencies in vitamin D3. I mean, I've seen estimates that 50% of the world's population, 85% of the African American and Latino community, because of the pigment of their skin, is clinically deficient in vitamin D3. In fact, one of the reasons why COVID disproportionately affected minorities was not because of their minority status, but because of skin pigmentation and plummeting levels of vitamin D3. These are simple, inexpensive supplements that you could take, D3 with K2, for example, that could materially change the trajectory of your life.
Can you unpack what you said about skin complexion? So the darker your complexion.
Yeah, so the darker your complexion, the less you absorb light rays from the sun. And I mean, the upside to that is that they also age less, right? I mean, this is why darker complected people look great in older ages, right? I mean,
black don't crack.
Oh yeah, black don't crack. I mean,
Jelly.
Cubans, Latinos, blacks. I mean, the skin's beautiful late into ages because it's more oily, but it also absorbs less vitamin D3. And so, if you take a light-skinned Caucasian and you put him in the sun for the same period of time, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Versus a dark-skinned, dark-complected person, you'd see that one will generate 3,000 to 5,000 IUs of vitamin D3. One will generate 25,000 IUs of vitamin D3. And so, supplementing for these deficiencies could have a material change in people's lives. And I used to see it in medical records. We would see 10, 12, 15 years of just floored out vitamin D3. And then here comes the autoimmune. And then here comes the repeated viral attacks. And then here comes the repeated, they get flus 3 or 4 times a year. They got heavy amounts of seasonal allergies. When they do get sick, it's for prolonged periods of time. And it would just drive me crazy because I'd want to pick up the phone and say, ma'am, start supplementing take 5,000 IUs of D3 and 80 micrograms of K2 every day. I think you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
But now you're on the antibiotics and you're doing other things to kind of protect the immune system when it can't, perform its function.
Yeah. Do you catch flack sometimes online for not having a medical background?
Oh yeah. I get huge amounts of hate,
Huge amounts of hate, yeah. But the thing is, the financial industry has become so good at predicting a person's financial responsibility, right?
Yeah.
That they've devised the credit score. And the credit score is like a really accurate portrait of generally how responsible a person is with money, right? So these credit institutions might not have the relationship with me that, of like a personal financial advisor, right? But in general, they have this number, which I think is a pretty good, accurate indication of where somebody stands financially. And so too, you come from a background of, working in life insurance where you essentially do the same thing, but for a person's health.
Yeah.
And through that career, you've likely analyzed hundreds, if not thousands of medical records and things like that. Tens of thousands.
I mean, I have read thousands of times more medical records than a physician because a physician's out practicing medicine, right? But I would have to read the patient history, the treatment protocol, the diagnosis, and extract it from the medical record and then look at the impact that would have in the mortality model. And what was fascinating about a lot of these was that, the level of misdiagnosis, right? Because, a lot of times the physicians are just overworked. They're seeing 30, 40. I mean, we would routinely get medical records from practices where doctors were seeing 60 patients a day.
Wow.
I mean, it was mind-numbing to me. And when you read the patient history, you know, the patient comes in, it's like, listen, doc, you know, soles of my feet and my ankles hurt when I get out of bed in the morning. You know, I feel like I had a workout the night before when I haven't. I wake up sore and achy. You know, lately the small of my back and my hips are really stiff, you know, and just recently, man, it's hard to make a really tight fist. Well, I mean, if you parallel those symptoms, I mean, they parallel rheumatoid arthritis. And, you know, sometimes a doc will go, well, you know what, you've got rheumatoid arthritis. Without pulling RA factor, without actually pulling SED rates, without doing the confirmatory diagnosis. The problem with this is we used to call it anchor diagnosis. So once a physician makes a diagnosis and it goes into your medical record, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, no one ever goes back to say, hey, I wonder if they actually came to the right conclusion. You are forever a rheumatoid patient, a diabetic patient, a hypertensive patient, a hypothyroid patient. You forever have this condition, and the next physician in line will just continue that course of care. Instead of saying, well, how did they diagnose hypothyroid? Was it based on your level of T3 in the blood? Because only 20% of the T3 is produced by the thyroid. 80% of the T3 is actually methylated in the gut. I wonder if they actually looked at the methylation in the gut. Or if they just saw low T3 and put you on Synthroid or levothyroxine or armorthyroid or another kind of natural dissected thyroid. And never, I don't recall once in my entire 20-year career where I ever saw a previous diagnosis challenged in the future, unless somehow something demonstrative came out in the medical record, like, you know, patients diagnosed with Parkinson's were later found to have viral pathogens. I mean, this has happened in our practice recently. You know, one of our physicians who was caring for a Parkinson's patient said, hey, you know, I noticed this elevated white blood cell count in all of your medical records, all the way back to from the day that you were diagnosed with Parkinson's. You know, there's this elevated, it's called an immature granulocyte, and another white blood cell marker that's elevated in chronic viral infections. And she said, you know, have you showed this to your neurologist? And he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I did bring that up to my neurologist, and he said he doesn't know why it's elevated, so he just threw it out. She was like, just threw it out. Next time that you're in town, I want to pull a full viral panel on you. She pulls a full viral panel, chronic Lyme and chronic West Nile.
Wow.
And he was like, how the hell did I get chronic West Nile? Well, interestingly, you get West Nile from a Zika mosquito bite. And the Zika capital of the world for a very short period of time, believe it or not, was in Miami Beach, Florida.
Miami.
They had a massive breakout of Zika. In fact, for a while, there was warnings for pregnant women not to go to Miami Beach because of the prevalence of Zika. And I think the mosquito actually comes from Brazil, but somehow it migrated to, you know, it's the gateway to Latin America. So I'm sure on a flight or in some fruit or something, this mosquito's gotten to Miami Beach. There was a massive breakout right in the canals around the convention center and South Beach. A lot of people were coming down with Zika, and then it led to chronic West Nile. And so she started treating him for a viral pathogen, put him on an aggressive, you know, antiviral protocol. And interestingly, I mean, her position is he was misdiagnosed with Parkinson's.
Wow. So there are viral infections that can produce symptomology akin to Parkinson's disease.
Oh, no question. I think the majority of our pathologic diagnoses, especially neuropathic disorders, are viral or parasitic related. And, you know, when you look at things like, you know, Crohn's disease, you know, this is an inflammatory condition in the bowel where the immune system is supposedly attacking the bowel. And the question is the immune system dysfunctional? Do you have an autoimmune condition where the immune system just, you know, woke up one day, went haywire, and said, you know what, I'm gonna start attacking proteins in the luminal wall of the gut? Or are there bacteria that should stay inside of the gut that have leaked out of the gut into a place where they don't belong, and the immune system is doing its job protecting the body by going after those bacteria or those pathogens in the wall of the gut and causing this massive inflammatory response that's shutting down the gut? And then what do? We stand on the immune system with heavy anti-inflammatories, right? Heavy steroids. And then we stand on the rest of the immune system sometimes with immunosuppressants. So, you know, it's like a bouncer at the door of a bar. He's like, hey, you're not allowed to come in here. And you're not supposed to be in here. You know, I threw you out last week. And then they go in and the bouncer goes in and the fight starts.
Wow.
Right? And they're trying to, they're trying to fight each other, but, tables are getting broken and people are getting knocked over and innocent people getting elbowed in the face. It's kind of what's going on in the wall of the gut, right? The immune system's not there to necessarily attack the gut. The immune system's there to get pathogens out that shouldn't be in that location.
Of course.
And as a result, the massive inflammation shows up there. And a lot of times, we're diagnosed with conditions by just giving a fancy name to a collection of symptoms, right? Like irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, well, you have gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, and cramping. Well, you got irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, thanks. Like, you just gave a name to all the shit that I have going on, right? It's like, what's causing this?
What's the root cause?
Right? What's the root cause? And I talk about it all the time, about how, when I was in grad school, and I took all these plant botany courses that I really hated, but I was getting a human biology degree, post-grad. And I was like, why do I have to study azaleas and oak trees? But what's really interesting about plant physiology is that anytime there's something wrong in the leaf or the trunk or the branches of a tree or a shrub, a true arborist or true botanist, if you call them out to your house, they will not touch the leaf or the branches or the trunk. They will core test the soil. And they'll say this soil is phosphorus or nitrogen deficient. They add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf heals. But we've stopped thinking about human beings this way, right? We're so accustomed to, there's, I think, 32,000 diagnoses now that exist, right? Because I got to take your symptoms, slot you into a category and say, you have irritable bowel syndrome, you have Crohn's disease, you have an autoimmune disease, you have this condition, you have that condition, without saying, like, what could be missing from this biome that's causing it to behave that way? What nutrient could be gone from this person's body that's actually causing the expression of this disease?
What do you think is causing such widespread nutrient deficiencies today?
Well, it's a whole host of things. I mean, first of all, we've gotten very far away from the basics. People talk to me about diet and, all the time. And my dietary advice is very simple. Eat whole foods. Whether you're carnivore, keto, paleo, vegan, vegetarian. Some of the sickest clients I've ever had have been raw food vegans. Some of the sickest clients I've ever had have been hardcore carnivore. And the truth is, when you start to look at what they consider to be keto or carnivore or raw, I mean, if you're a vegan, for example, you can have white flour, white rice, white bread, white pasta, white potatoes, beer.
Yeah, Oreo cookies are vegan.
Yeah, Oreo cookies are vegan, right? So that category doesn't necessarily mean that you're healthy. A carnivore diet is an amazing diet, but if you're on a carnivore diet and you're not eating grass-fed meats, you're not eating pasture-raised eggs, you're not eating raw dairy, and you're eating 1% milk or lactate-free milk or what have you, these can actually contribute to the issue. So it's not actually the food, it's the distance from the food to the table. Like
poorly raised meat?
Well, poorly raised meat. There were pesticides, herbicides, insecticides. Glyphosate is terrible for us. I mean, banned in most European countries, and we allow it here. Genetically modified foods, where we actually take a seed and we genetically modify it to be resistant to glyphosate, not to increase the yield or to increase the nutritional content, but to make it resistant to poison. And very often what happens when you genetically modify a food source, the body now doesn't recognize it, doesn't have the enzymatic makeup to digest this food. So now you get even less nutrients from it, and you cause inflammation. And inflammation is the root of all evil. And so it's very often the distance from the food to the table. Seed oils, for example, which are getting a very bad rap, deservedly. I talk about it all the time. It's not necessarily that the seed oil itself is bad, a cold-pressed seed oil. It's that we take that cold-pressed seed oil, we degum it with hexane, then we heat it to 405 degrees and turn it rancid. Then we decloud it with sodium hydroxide, and then we bottle it, and then we put it on the shelf. Okay, so now that's horrible for you.
Yeah, I mean, they've gone through all these myriad processing steps. And when you say seed oil, what types of seed oils in particular?
Sunflower, safflower, canola.
So these are like the cooking oils. You're not talking about sesame seed oil, right?
Well, I tell people that if you want to make it very simple, you need 5 oils in your life. Okay, 4 that you can use for cooking, extra virgin coconut oil, tallow is excellent, grass-fed butter, ghee butter. And if you're vegan, you can also use ghee butter. It's a clarified butter. And those won't denature at high temperatures. And then a clean, real, 100% extra virgin olive oil for room temperature. If you just use those 5 oils, I promise you, number one, you'd never notice the taste profile change. In fact, you'd probably notice it improve. And then secondly, you wouldn't be taking oils at high temperatures and turning them rancid. And you could make any myriad of recipes. Yes, there are other things. You can get cold pressed flaxseed oil. I'm not saying that there aren't other oils, but I'm saying you want to make life simple, get those 5 oils.
Yeah.
Put them in your kitchen. And I promise you can make any myriad of food choices from that.
Well, there's a fundamental difference between refined, bleached, and deodorized soybean oil.
Don't forget the hexane.
With hexane, right? And sesame oil, which has been used as a culinary ingredient in various types of cuisine around the world for centuries at this point, right? But soybean oil has only been on the market for the past 60 years or so.
Right. And, if you look at, how nutrient depleted our soil has become, one of the last times we updated a soil lineage study in the United States was in the late 40s. So you look at the macros on a spinach and you're like, okay, well, it has so much protein, so much carbohydrate, so much sugar, so much fat. But very often the nutritional content, like how much iron is in the spinach, how much magnesium is in here, how much potassium is in here, and that's been borrowed from a soil lineage study done in the 40s. When you think about the condition of the soil today versus the condition of the soil back then, I mean, we used potash and cow manure, and we tilled that stuff back into the soil, so it was very rich. This is why grass-fed meats, for example, are night and day different from commercially raised cattle. Right? If you look at the omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acid ratios, linoleic acid, you look at the caliber, the saturated fat, and then you look at, well, these cows are actually eating grass, worms, bugs. They're actually eating some soil. When they pull that up, they don't just nibble on the top of it. They pull the whole root up. They swallow that, so they're getting phosphorus, nitrogen, magnesium, light metals from the soil. It's excellent for them.
Healthy bacteria.
Yeah, healthy bacteria. It's funny. My wife, who's right off camera over there, my wife, Sage, and we were walking in our 50-acre place in Aspen. I want that rumor to get out. But we were walking on our little off-the-grid ranch, and we came upon this perfectly preserved elk skeleton. It must have been years old, but it looked like you could have picked it up off the ground and put it in the Smithsonian. It was perfect. It was laying on its side, had skull, had all the, the ribs and all the bones, almost like it had been just perfectly laid there. And I picked up the skull and I flipped it over and I showed it to her and I was like, "Do you notice anything about this skull?" And she goes, "No, it's dirty and it's kind of gross." And I said, "No." I said, "Look at the teeth. From the furthest rear molar all the way around the front of the teeth, all the way to the back, they were perfect. They were still solidly intact into the skull. There wasn't an ounce of rot. There was no cavities. There was no chips. This was a healthy animal. It ate grass, bugs, worms, right? It ate what it was meant to eat. If you flip over the skull of a commercially raised cattle, you'll see that the majority of the time their teeth are rotted all the way up above the gum line.
Wow.
And it's sometimes at the tail end of their life, they're dying of type 2 diabetes, right before they're slaughtered. Very often they're slurping corn syrup and soybean powder, which is not what cattle are meant to eat. And because they can't chew any longer. So the meat is full of pus and it's full of, it's full of inflammatory factors, which eventually goes into us. We're not what we eat. We're what we eats.
Yeah, and also fat is an endocrine organ, right? Adipocytes are endocrine.
Yeah, organ meats are so good for you. Organ fats are so good for you. Saturated fat isn't so beat up in the media as the source of all, cardiovascular disease. And what was interesting too is that this data exists in mortality too. And so a lot of what I talk about is based on the pool of very large numbers, and it goes against the grain of what we hear in modern medicine, statins but we would see the trajectory of statins on hormone dysfunction, on immune system regulation, on cell wall metabolism, which will eventually affect mitochondrial function. And yes, you push LDL cholesterol down, but it's like whack-a-mole, right? I mean, you whack that mole, one pops up somewhere else, but you're not really tracking those other effects. I've said for for years, and I get absolutely slaughtered on this when I say it, but there was no evidence that we could find in the mortality space linking elevated levels of LDL cholesterol on their own to cardiovascular disease. And I would still love to see a study just linking solely LDL cholesterol to cardiovascular disease. I mean, cholesterol is not a fuel source. You know, it's a construction material. We build cell walls, cell membranes, hormones from it. And there's this analogy: LDL up, that's bad, take a statin. But it's not quite that simple, right? And some of the worst research ever done on human beings is when we take cells and we study them in isolation, right? We put them in a petri dish in vitro, and we say, okay, how does it behave all by itself? Well, human beings behave differently in isolation than they do in communities. Cells behave differently in isolation than they do in communities. I mean, there's a whole entire network, frequency of communication, of exchange with the outside environment that has to be taken into account when you actually talk about the health, cellular health of an organism. You know, if you want to cut a human being's life expectancy in half, and I mean by 50%, put them in isolation. You will cut a human's life expectancy in half.
Well, yeah, social isolation is a toxin on par with drinking alcohol chronically and smoking.
Possibly even worse.
Yeah.
Right? I mean like sedentary lifestyle. You know, sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality now. And, you know, not being sedentary will outweigh not smoking, not drinking, and not eating a poor diet.
Yeah.
You know,
I think putting the focus on LDL cholesterol, I'm not saying that it's not important. It's not an important biomarker that should continue to be studied. And in fact, you know, it's probably likely that very high levels of LDL is actually like a surrogate indicator of metabolic illness and a sign that you're probably eating a junk diet and the like. But to myopically focus on it, to hyper focus on it.
Yeah, exactly. That's
right?
what I mean. I mean, you know, there's a lot to cholesterol, apolittle-A's, apolittle-B's. There are some genetically inherited conditions like apolipoprotein A, which I don't think there's a pharmaceutical for right now. So, you know, diet and lifestyle changes are really...
That's largely genetically influenced, right?
That's largely genetically influenced. I mean, that's kind of the bad one. But, you know, when we would see marginally elevated levels of LDL cholesterol and prolonged periods of low triglyceride, we would extend that person's life expectancy. If they started a statin, we would immediately reduce their life expectancy. And the reason for that is that nobody starts these drugs and gets off of them, right? They're not guardrails. They are permanently inhibiting a physiologic process in the body. And I'm not saying there's times that should not happen by any means. But what I'm saying is when we oversimplify this one isolated compound in the body, and, you know, I really encourage people to get data, right? You know, don't just supplement for the sake of supplementing, supplement for deficiency, get data on your body. You know, when I talk to entrepreneurs, most of them know way more about their income statement, their balance sheet, their P&L, than they know about their own bodies. It's fascinating to me. I'm like, why don't you have an income statement, a P&L, and a balance sheet for your body?
It's so true.
Like, where's your hemoglobin A1C?
Absolutely.
Where's your testosterone?
Yeah, it's so important to get data because what you measure, you can manage and ultimately improve. We work with an amazing company called LifeForce. Are you familiar with LifeForce? Yeah, so LifeForce makes it super easy.
Do they make supplements?
They do make supplements.
I think I use their supplements.
Yeah, but I think the coolest thing about them is that they make it really easy to get. They send a phlebotomist to your home. They do the blood draw in your house. They send the blood to a lab, and they give you all these LDL, ApoB, your A1C, your fasting blood sugar, triglycerides, all that stuff. Yeah,
so now you have data. And the cool thing is that once you take a little bit of time to educate, you don't have to become a full-blown medical professional, but once you take a little bit of time to start to understand what this data means, it becomes fun because you're like, how do I get that down?
Yeah.
How do I get that up? What's the optimal range for hormone? What is the optimal range for my testosterone? How do I get it there? You know, getting high on my own supply rather than taking an exogenous hormone. And maybe I should look at my D3 level, my DHEA level. Maybe I should see if I have a protein that interrupts my hormone conversion called sex hormone binding globulin. And you can use simple nutrients like boron, you know, and things like that to get that protein out of the way. And then magically your hormone levels rise, you know, back into the optimal range. You're high on your own supply. You're producing plenty of healthy red blood cells and hemoglobin, and you're more awake during the day and you're deeper asleep at night. And this is what I mean. Like, we are not far away from being optimal, but half of us are walking around at maybe 60% of our true state of normal, right? And I love it when people tell me like, oh my God, Gary, I feel amazing. And I'm like, you don't feel amazing. You just feel normal. That's what normal's supposed to feel like. You're supposed to feel like that. You're supposed to be horny as the devil, sleep like a bear. Happy. You're supposed to have great, healthy short-term recall. I mean, yeah, of course, when you're stressed and you're flying a lot or what have you. But overall, you're supposed to wake up and have clean, clear, cognizant, waking energy. You're supposed to have the libido of a fucking lion. You're supposed to, lay down to go to sleep and your mind quiet and go into a deep sleep and wake up refreshed. And you're supposed to be able to maintain elevated emotional states for a prolonged period of time. These are not things that are unique to human beings. They are things that are standards, how God meant us to be, wants us to thrive. But what we've done is we've slowly thrown all these little tiny anchors off of our stern. And then we've accepted those as a consequence of aging, which they're not. They're a consequence of missing raw material in the human body. And if you get data, my suggestion is that you do a gene test once in your life and you look at what's called methylation pathways. Genetic methylation, you see, hey, what nutrients can my body convert into the usable form, and what can it not? Start there, because now you have a roadmap for supplementing. Do I need methylfolate? Do I need a certain form of B12? Do I need a B complex, zinc, magnesium? Do I need things like SAM-E? And if you just give the body the raw material it needs to do its job, magic things happen, right? Magic things happen. And then you start there and then get a blood test like from the company you just described, and you get data. And then what'll happen is you'll move that data in a positive direction, and the consequence will be all of those things that you wanted as an outcome. Better response to exercise, deeper sleep, greater short-term recall, clean, clear waking energy, libido comes back like a tire. I mean, I tell people sometimes, I'm like, just looking at your labs, in about 10 weeks, somebody in the house is going to need a safe word. because the libido is coming back.
That's hilarious.
Libido is coming back. And the sad thing is that, this has impacts on relationships, because people equate love and attraction, which are emotional states, with libido, which is a psychosomatic response in the body. And if libido leaves a marriage, then, meaning there's sex drive, it doesn't mean you don't love your spouse, you're not attracted to your spouse. It means you are not being aroused. Right. And that arousal is a psychosomatic response, and it can be restored. But sadly, when it leaves a marriage or a relationship, one or the other party is like, well, you don't love me anymore. You're not attracted to me anymore.
You're screwed without being screwed.
And
rim shot.
We need to. So you're screwed without being screwed, and then now you key in on it, and then it gets worse when if you just had data and you could move your hormones into the optimal range. I mean, you show me somebody with healthy levels of free testosterone that doesn't have libido, right? And so just by getting this data, making these subtle changes, you just materially change the trajectory of your life.
Tell me more about methylation, because I'm actually homozygous for the MTHFR mutation.
Do you know if you have the C677T
That's
or
it.
the A1298C?
Yeah, the 677, yeah.
Okay, so so there's two. Those are called alleles, right? So you have a gene, and for those people that are not familiar with what methylation is, right? So the saying that our genes load the gun, right, but our environment pulls the trigger is very true. Right, we can turn genes on and off. We can enhance their function. We can downregulate their function. But the genes you're born with are the genes you die with. So you may have a predisposition, but it does not mean that your destiny is predetermined. And so take the MTHFR gene, right, affectionately called the motherfucker gene.
Yeah, I've heard that.
It stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, but it's MTHFR, so people call it the motherfucker gene. By the way, if you do look this gene up online, make sure you capitalized MTHFR, or you really find yourself on some colorful websites.
I'm sure.
But so this gene, amongst other things, regulates the body's ability to convert folic acid and its derivatives like folate into the usable form called methylfolate. So let's start with the concept that we pull crude oil out of the ground, right? But you cannot put crude oil into your gas tank. The reason why you cannot put crude oil into your gas tank is it doesn't understand that fuel source. That crude oil has not yet been refined. As soon as it's refined into gasoline, now the car can operate. This is what methylation does in human beings. It takes a raw material, crude oil, and it refines it into gasoline. So it takes a raw material like folic acid or folate, right? And it refines it into the usable form called methylfolate. It is methylfolate that prevents neural tube defects. It's methylfolate that downregulates neurotransmitters. It's methylfolate that is the methylated nutrient that we need in the human body. So what happens if you can't make this conversion? Like in your case with the C677T mutation, you're very prone to anxiety. Mild anxiety. And in fact, the type of anxiety you're prone to is one you will have had on and off throughout your lifetime. And very often people with that, did you say you're homozygous? Or
Homozygous,
Oh,
yeah.
wow. Okay. So meaning from both parents, right?
Yeah, I've got, I guess it's like 2 mutations. I'm particularly bad. I'm like especially bad at converting folate to methylfolate.
Yeah, so you absolutely need to be supplementing with methylfolate, 5-MTHF. That would be material change in your life if you're not doing that already.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked very closely with one of the preeminent specialists in the field of dementia prevention, and supplementing with the methylated forms of B12 and folate has been, a staple in terms of my prevention strategy.
Amazing.
And in fact, before I started taking it, my homocysteine was high.
Yeah.
Which you wouldn't expect for a young guy.
Right.
I think at the time in which
You're on your way to hypertension.
First measured it, I was like 32 years old, and I started taking these B vitamins, and I saw it come way down.
Yeah.
It went from like
Exactly
14
what
to
I mean.
like 6.
I'm so happy to hear this because somebody giving a personal testimonial, because this is exactly what my mission is about. Because so now you can't convert folic acid and its derivatives into methylfolate. So now you have an excess of those in the blood, and you have a deficiency in methylfolate. So what happens? Well, first of all, it doesn't sound like a big deal to not be able to make this conversion until you realize that folic acid is the most prevalent nutrient in the human diet. And folic acid, first of all, for those people listening, is an entirely man-made nutrient. We make folic acid in a laboratory. It is not a vitamin. It's not vitamin B9. Folic acid does not occur anywhere naturally in nature. You cannot find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth. Folate you can, right? Green leafy vegetables, grass-fed meats. But folic acid we make in a laboratory. In 1993, I forget the pharmaceutical company that convinced the U.S. federal government to do this, but we began to spray our entire grain supply with folic acid. Right? So all white flour, all white rice, all white bread, all white pasta, and grains of all kinds in the United States are sprayed with the chemical folic acid. Only we don't call it sprayed with folic acid. We call it fortified or enriched. So when you spin a box of crackers around and it says fortified whole wheat flour, enriched bleached white flour, that means it's been sprayed with this chemical folic acid. Well, 44% of the population has the same gene mutation you do, which means 44% of the population can't process that.
Wow.
So what happens when you start eating a diet high in folic acid? You go nuts, right? It causes the mind to accelerate and ricochet, which is what we call ADD or ADHD. And an attention deficit disorder is actually not an attention deficit at all. It's an attention overload disorder. It's too many windows open at the same time.
Whoa.
Right? It's complete nonsense that people with ADD and ADHD cannot pay attention. They can't pay attention to so many things, right? And then we go, well, little Johnny can't pay attention. He doesn't follow directions. He's disruptive. He's impulsive. He doesn't finish his assignments. We need to bring in the Ritalin to solve this, right? Because modern medicine says, well, if the mind is racing, let's pump an amphetamine into the body to race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind.
Yikes.
That's an absurd idea. Why don't we actually quiet the mind? Get the folic acid out of the diet. So if you have this gene mutation, avoid folic acid like the plague, which means that if you do eat white flour, white rice, white bread, white pasta, or grains, that you need to really eat the organic version of those, the non-fortified, non-enriched versions. And the sad thing is that the general population, when they're walking down the cereal aisle, they're like, well, there's a box of cereal, and there's the same box of cereal, and it's fortified. It's enriched. I'll get that for my kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I was a mom and I'd be like, well, I would definitely want to get them the fortified cereal or the enriched cereal.
Yeah, right.
And now we feed this stuff to the kids, and then it's a full contact sport to get them in the car to go to school in the morning. And we wonder why. Because folic acid can be like cocaine for a 6-year-old. Just makes their little mind race.
Well, it's also all the added sugar being served to kids, refined grain products. I mean, children today in the U.S., 70% of their calories come from ultra-processed foods.
Wow. I didn't even know it was that high. Wow.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, for adults, it's 60%. It's even higher for children.
Wow.
In the UK, they're doing a little bit better.
Adults, in the UK, they do a lot better. I mean, there are a lot of compounds that are legal in the United States that are not legal anywhere else in the world. And the UK is one of those that really is. California is starting to do a good job of getting certain food dyes, colorings, additives that they're actually banning, right?
Right. Finally,
I think they just banned Skittles or something
like that. One of the compounds in Skittles.
Yeah, and it's these red dyes. I mean, these are so non-natural. But the point is that so you have this gene mutation. So what are the consequences of this gene mutation? Like, if somebody's listening to this, how might you think that you have this gene mutation? Well, number one, if you've had anxiety on and off throughout your lifetime. If it's hard for you to point to the specific trigger that causes your anxiety, and if your anxiety is accompanied by gut issues, because methylfolate restores normal peristaltic activity to the gut, the pace of the gut. It also downregulates a category of neurotransmitters called catecholamines. Catecholamines are fight or flight neurotransmitters, right? What is anxiety? It is the presence of a fear internally, maybe with or without the presence of a fear externally, right? So you don't need the presence of a fear to feel anxiety, right? You don't need to be afraid of heights and walk to the edge of a 30th floor balcony or be claustrophobic and step on a crowded elevator. You could be doing a podcast like we're doing right now, just chilling, and all of a sudden like be kind of overwhelmed with anxiety, right? That is not coming from your outside environment. That's coming from your physiology. And in many cases, it's fixable. And it's fixable with simple dietary nutrients. This is why some people that say, man, I got on a carnivore diet, I felt freaking amazing. My anxiety's gone. Well, it was because you didn't have anxiety. You had a methylfolate deficiency, right? And this is the way I wish we would think about human beings. There's such a paucity of understanding of deep human physiology in the medical community. We've lost so much faith in the body's ability to heal itself and for mankind and humanity to be in a state of optimal health without chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals. And, this is why I'm, big on like ancestral type diets, and, clean, hydration and supplementing for the sake of deficiency. You supplementing with methylfolate is going to permanently change the trajectory of your life. Well,
yeah. One thing that I personally observed very clearly was my homocysteine came down.
Yeah, and if we talk about homocysteine for a second. So homocysteine is a natural amino acid. Everybody listening to this podcast has it in their bloodstream. But when you have slow metabolism, breakdown of homocysteine, so the body is really fascinating when you understand how it takes one compound, breaks it down, takes that waste, turns it into another compound, breaks it down, takes that waste, turns it into another compound. It's like the most fascinating God-made recycling plant in the world. And the more I studied human physiology, the more I believed in a creator, that it wasn't just two bacteria banging in a mud puddle, right? Right? It crawled out as a lizard and then became an ape and then became a human.
Our bodies, are exquisitely elegant and complex all at once.
It's amazing, and it's like this perfect symphony, this harmonic symphony of frequency and the quantum and emotion and energy and nutrients, and it's just fascinating to me. But when we look at homocysteine, right? So as this amino acid rises in the blood, because you slowly break it down, which, by the way, we turn that into something called methionine, which quiets the mind. And then we turn that into something called SAMe, S-adenosylmethionine, which breaks down the neurotransmitters of fear, called catecholamines. So if you look at this sequence of events, let's say we have a hard time breaking down homocysteine. Homocysteine rises. It now becomes one of the most inflammatory compounds in the human body. As it's cruising by the inside lining of the artery, it irritates the artery, reduces its elasticity. It can actually cause it to constrict. Don't forget, you got 63,000 miles of blood vessel in your body. 63,000 miles. This is why when people tell me that skin is the largest organ in the body, I say, well, I mean, I get that that's a stated thing, but if you look at the surface area of the skin, it's about half a tennis court. If you look at the surface area of the inside lining of your arteries, the endothelium of the arteries, it's about 6 tennis courts.
Wow.
Right? 12 times the surface area. So I would rather have a problem in the skin than have a problem in the lining of my arteries. And so now you have this homocysteine, it's cruising around, it's irritating the arteries, and all of a sudden they start to clamp down. Well, what happens when you make the pipes smaller in a fixed system? Pressure goes up. And then we call this hypertension, right? And this is why when you look at hypertensive diagnoses, right, primary hypertension or essential hypertension, these are idiopathic diagnoses, which in Latin means of unknown origin. So 85% of all hypertensive diagnoses are idiopathic, of unknown origin. And we look at the heart, and even if we don't find anything wrong with the heart, no abnormal EKG, no abnormal EEG, no heart and lung sounds, no cardiac cath, no dye contrast study, nothing that finds a problem with the heart, we still medicate the heart for a crime it's not committing. So what happened if we looked outside the heart and we said, you know, is there a chance? And there was an interesting, there's a Journal of Hypertension article in 2017, November 19th of 2017, that lays this out perfectly. The link between high homocysteine, or hyperhomocystinemia, and hypertension. And so now you make the pipe smaller in a fixed system and the pressure goes up. Well, what happens when you bring the homocysteine down? Vascular system relaxes. Pressure returns to normal. This is what happened in Dana White's case. Like, oh my God, you fixed his hypertension. I was like, no, I didn't fix his hypertension. I fixed his methylation and his blood pressure returned to normal. There was nothing wrong with his heart, right? And the reason why he was able to get off of all of his hypertensive medication, and I'm not saying everybody listening to this, stop taking your hypertensive medication, start taking folate. What I am telling you is if you have high homocysteine, you certainly should begin to supplement with something like trimethylglycine and methylated multivitamins. I have one that perfectly fixes this, but I'm not the only one that makes a methylated multivitamin. And watch what happens to your blood pressure as your homocysteine falls. Because and then we've developed an entire fallacy around this that, well, you have genetically inherited hypertension. Because if you have high homocysteine, you inherited that from your ancestor, right? You did not inherit the disease hypertension.
Right.
So there's a very distinct difference between inheriting a nutrient deficiency that leads to that disease and actually inheriting a disease. Because if I can get you to believe that you have a disease, I can get you to subscribe to a lifetime of medication.
Is it can you simply eat more green leafy vegetables which are rich in folate, or beef liver, things like that?
Yeah,
or
you
do you
can eat
need
more
to
cruciferous vegetables. You can eat, you know, this is again why people that get on carnivore diet feel so good. I mean, that eat high amounts of cruciferous vegetables because, you know, you can get dietary folate from green leafy vegetables. You can get it from grass-fed meats. You can, you know, so when you're eating things like pasture-raised eggs, pasture-raised chickens, grass-fed meats, organ meats especially, or supplementing with an organ supplement, you're getting the amount of dietary folate and some of the other amino acids that you need in order to downregulate homocysteine. And so, and to keep it from spiking. And it's linked to vision problems, it's linked to poor circulation, it's linked to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. There's an excellent article on cardiometabolic, study on cardiometabolic stroke, and the direct link between the incidence of the MTHFR gene mutation and cardiometabolic stroke.
Wow.
Rates. A direct causal link, like the incidence of specifically the gene mutation that you have, MTHFR, with the allele C677T. And man, if I could supplement to put that in my rearview mirror.
Yeah, right.
Why would I not just do that first?
And so the proposed mechanism is through the lever is hypertension. It's causing hypertension.
It's causing hypertension because hyperhomocystinemia, and again, I'm not saying 100% of these cases. There, you know, hypertension is multifactorial. Certainly, atherosclerosis, arterial sclerosis, type 2 diabetes, obesity, weight gain, hormone imbalance can all play a role. But there is a direct causal link between hyperhomocystinemia and hypertension because of the vascular constriction and the loss of vascular integrity.
Wow.
And what happens when you start losing vascular integrity or you start having compromised vascular diameter? Well, you reduce circulation to the brain. What are the consequences of that? Poor short-term recall. What do we call that? Early onset dementia. What are the consequences of reduced circulation to the heart, reduced ejection fraction? Well, what do we call that? We call that congestive heart failure. What are the consequences of reduced circulation to the periphery? Compromised nerve function. We call that peripheral neuropathy. And so now all of a sudden, you know, your mom or your dad wakes up one day and they're like, hey, you got early onset dementia, you've got congestive heart failure, you've got peripheral neuropathy, all of which come down to circulation, right? So why don't we look at restoring proper circulation instead of now gabapentin for the nerves, you know, blood pressure medication, a blood thinner, you know, a cholesterol medication, a beta blocker, thyroid, you know, what have you.
Yeah, I mean, hypertension, which now affects, I believe, 50% of adults.
Is it that high? Yeah,
in the United States? Yeah,
not surprising.
Half of adults have hypertension. Is one of the major modifiable risk factors for the development of dementia.
And this was the thing that happened to me in my career, is that I literally woke up one day and said, what the fuck am I doing? I'm spending my entire lifetime predicting how soon people are going to die. I've got real information that could help people live healthier, happier, longer lives. And these are not just spreadsheets. This isn't just data. There's human beings on the other side of this data. And how many times during my career could I have just picked up the phone, if I hadn't been legally prohibited from doing so, and just contacted that patient and said, hey, stop taking the methotrexate, start taking vitamin D3. You know, stop, you know, talk to your doctor about getting off your hypertensive medication and start getting your homocysteine down. It's been elevated on all of your labs. It's just being ignored. You know, there's these underlying, you know, elevated white blood cells that are indicative of a chronic viral infection. You're being treated for a neuropathic disorder. And the reason why it's not working is because the virus is still there. And so, you know, a lot of times we're infected with bugs and parasites and you get the expression of disease, and then we get treated for a disease when we should be treated for a viral pathogen, right? Or a parasitic infection. And so, you know, this is why getting data on our bodies is just so important. And it starts younger and younger and younger. You know, metabolic syndrome, which is kind of a combination of a myriad of things, but it's generally agreed to be abdominal obesity, or hypertension, you know, high blood pressure, very low HDL cholesterol, which is, you know, just not getting the right fats, elevated cholesterol, and high blood sugar with high insulin. So hyperinsulinemia, you know, hyperhomocysteinemia, which is leading to hypertension, you know, abdominal obesity, and you know, type 2 diabetes. If you have any two of those five, you're considered to have metabolic syndrome. When I met Dana, he had 5 of those 5.
Wow.
But there are 25-year-olds walking around right now with 3 of those 5. And just because you're skinny doesn't mean you don't have metabolic syndrome. The medical evidence in the literature is so conflicting, right? It's hard to say this is exactly what you should be doing and this is what you should be eating. But the one thing we all agree on is that sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality.
Yeah.
And the less we move, the sicker we become.
It's the worst thing. You know, we've always said in the fitness world, you can't outrun a bad diet, you know, which kind of puts the focus on diet. However, I actually think that exercise is more important. Like if you could only tweak one variable, which is obviously people tend to have more agency than that. But if you could only tweak one variable, I actually would say focus on exercise, focus on moving your body, and
focus on weight-bearing exercise, because you can get a cardiovascular condition by doing weight-bearing exercise. If you only have 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes a day, you know, stress the body with weight. And you know, what's amazing is muscles are metabolic currency, right? It's a sponge for sugar, for glucose, right? It increases our metabolic rate. You know, it helps determine our metabolism, our body temperature. I mean, muscle is a phenomenal organ, in my opinion. We don't think of it as an organ, but it really is. I'm having Dr. Gabrielle Lyon on my podcast, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, I think she's amazing too. I just finished reading her book too. That's also an intense read. But you know, basically she talks all the time about, you know, protein deficiency and how muscle is our metabolic currency, and it's very, very true. When we would see people becoming sarcopenic, they would have age-related muscle wasting. As they became increasingly more sarcopenic you would see the incidence of falls skyrocket, which is one of the greatest risk factors in older age. Things like grip strength. Why are grip strength so important? Because when you fall, you grab something, right? You grab the handrail. What happens to most people, like Joe Biden, is you slip on the steps and you grab the handrail. If you're not strong enough to keep yourself from falling, then down you go.
Yeah.
So you're walking down a set of steps and you misstep and your ankle buckles. Well, if you have a firm grip strength, you grab the handrail and that ankle buckling doesn't get any worse.
Well, I also feel like grip strength is a good sort of proxy indicator and a really easy to test proxy indicator.
You know what's amazing is grip strength,
strength
is directly related to longevity.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that makes sense because like it's just
one of the markers for longevity.
It's sort of like BMI. Like it is fairly crude, right? Like your grip strength doesn't necessarily correlate to your leg strength and your upper body strength, but it's probably
yeah,
there is probably a correlation.
Yeah, no, there is a correlation, and there's a chart.
It's like you don't want people to go out and buy like grip strengtheners and think that they're
just go and hang on a bar.
Yeah,
I mean just static hang on a bar, and there is a measure. It might even be in Peter Attia's book, but I forget where I read it. But there is a measure for age of how long you should be able to dead hang. And it's way harder than you think. I think from my age, I'm 53, it's like 2 minutes. When I'm getting to 2 minutes,
that's pretty hard.
I'm like meditating. I'm like,
yeah.
I usually start to shrink and the fingers are starting to come loose. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to dead hang every day for 2 minutes so I can get my grip strength up just mentally. So I'm okay with myself. But, it is astounding how many simple ancestral things like grip strength or your lean muscle mass are directly related to longevity.
Yeah, super. Resistance training is super important.
Yeah,
it's definitely like a staple in my life. Like I don't know where I would be mentally, physically without the passion that I have for resistance training. There was
a recent study out too that exercise outperformed SSRIs in depressive symptoms, and so there was a greater impact on the level of perceived depression on a Spain scale of emotion in people that actually exercised than in people that took SSRIs.
Wow.
And yet the last thing we want to do when we're in a bunk mood is move our bodies. But the best thing we can do is move our bodies. I wake up every morning, I do 3 rounds of 30 breath work. I do it like clockwork. I never, ever, ever miss. It's free. It's easy. But I think a lot of times because simple things like sunlight exposure, breath work, grounding, cold showers don't cost anything.
Yeah.
That people just don't give it the credence that it deserves. And I'm not talking to the super woke biohacker, right? That's already got their cold plunge and their red light bed and
they've got their 1,500 step morning routine down.
Yeah, and they're David Goggins discipline. I'm talking about the average, human, right? That first of all can't afford a cold plunge. Has never even heard of a red light therapy bed. Probably never heard of breath work. If we could get the message to the masses that there are simple things that you could do by having just a short disciplined routine first thing in the morning that would entirely change the trajectory of your life and wouldn't add a penny to your budget. We could really change the face of humanity.
Just talk to me about what an ideal morning routine might look like.
So an ideal morning routine, first of all, I think that the little wins that we give ourselves, strengthen our self-esteem in ways that are subconscious but profound, right? And like tell yourself, I'm going to go to bed at 10 o'clock. And then you go to bed at 10 o'clock and you just give yourself just that win, that simple win. Instead of saying, I'm going to go to bed at 10 o'clock tonight and then at 1:30 in the morning you're scrolling through Instagram. Internally, you're disappointed in yourself, And you might be fooling the outside world, but you're not fooling yourself, and you're slowly eroding your self-confidence, right? And you're slowly eroding your own self-image, and you're slowly eroding your own self-worth because you're not even capable of keeping a promise to yourself. And so, I tell people for 30 days, make a real commitment and use discipline, not motivation, because motivation kind of comes and goes, but discipline is like, okay, I'm getting up every morning at this time, and this is what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes. And my suggestion would be you wake up, splash water in your face, brush your teeth, and immediately right then and there, walk into a cold shower. If you have a cold plunge, get in a cold plunge, but walk into a cold shower. You're naked, you're just getting out of bed, take a 1 to 3 minute cold shower, dry off, and then preferably you're up at sunlight.
What are the benefits of that, the cold shower?
So the benefits of cold showers and cold water immersion are enormous, right? I mean, when you immerse your body in cold water, remember, first of all, the water is 29 times more thermogenic than air. This means it removes heat from the body at 29 times the rate of air. That's why you can die in 72-degree water, but you can't die in 72-degree air, right? There are plenty of documented cases. In fact, I think there's a movie about sadly, the 3 NFL players that were out fishing and their boat capsized.
I don't know about this.
Oh yeah, you can look the story up. There's a movie. Do you know the name of the movie, babe? Anyway, there's a movie about it.
3 NFL players.
3 NFL players. NFL players drown on fishing trip.
Drown
on fishing trip.
Fishing trip.
So what happened was the boat that they were on several years ago capsized.
February 2009, a fishing trip in Tampa?
Yep, in Tampa. That's
Whoa. I got to look into this. Very interesting. Not Without Hope? No.
That might be the name of the movie.
Possibly. But yeah, you can easily Google it. There's like an NBC Sports article.
Yeah. So what happened was, so you're talking about some of the most conditioned athletes in the world, right? And they were out fishing and big guys and on a center console boat. And what apparently happened was one of them hooked a fish and they all went to the side of the boat. And the boat capsized. So they went into 72 or 74 degree water, not freezing cold by any means, right? One of them crawled out on the keel of the boat in the sunlight. The other 2 held onto the motor, and they became so hypothermic after 40 plus hours in the water that they essentially passed away from hypothermia. The one that was on the keel of the boat in the sunlight survived. And so water is 29 times more thermogenic than air. I don't know why we just went down that really negative rabbit hole. Feel my energy come back.
Sad, but also interesting.
But so now it's removing heat at 29 times the rate. So what this does, it causes the body to panic. And your liver will try to save your life by dumping cold shock proteins into the bloodstream. If you look at cold shock proteins, they're phenomenal. They can scour the body of free radical oxidation. They can even increase the rate of protein synthesis, which is muscle repair. And your body releases a very special type of survival gene called a sirtuin, which is a survival gene. And then you have a massive peripheral vasoconstriction, right? So when you vasospasm the periphery, it drives oxygen into the core and up to the brain. So you're forcing oxygen to the liver, the lungs, the pancreas, the kidneys, and the brain.
Your vital organs.
Your vital organs. And at the same time, you activate a very special type of fat in the body called brown fat. And this is our thermostat. Right. And so we activate brown fat. The mitochondria has an affinity for brown fat versus, meaning as a fuel source, versus white fat or, adipose tissue. And so you activate this brown fat to try to turn the heat back on in the body. Well, there's a caloric expense to that. Right? So you increase caloric expenditure. It's also been shown to have a positive effect on blood sugar, not just insulin sensitivity, but blood sugar itself, helping to lower blood sugar and improve insulin sensitivity. I don't know what the direct correlation is there. But when you line all these things up, brown fat activation, shivering, increased caloric expenditure, peripheral vasospasm, release of cold shock proteins, it has an indirect response on weight loss.
Yeah, I mean, people will scoff because probably the magnitude of effect is not, well, it's probably a fraction of what a person's eating day in and day out.
Right.
But there's real science here. I mean, I've seen some of these studies that you're referencing, and I've had Susanna Soberg on the podcast, who's a PhD from Denmark, who literally has dedicated her career to studying cold shock and everything that it is that you're talking about. It's super interesting. But, online you get people that are like, oh, well, it's nothing if all you're eating is, if you're consuming more calories on a daily basis than you're burning. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But both things can be true.
I have a lot of haters that were like, there's no peer-reviewed double-blind clinical study that's been published in a major medical journal directly linking cold water exposure to fat loss. I go, you're right. But there are peer-reviewed studies linking lower levels of insulin to fat loss, lower levels of blood sugar to fat loss, higher thermogenic rates to fat loss, increased metabolism to fat loss, increased levels of caloric expenditure to fat loss. So you'd have to be an idiot not to line all of those things up and say, yes, it can help me burn fat. right?
Yeah.
If I don't increase my caloric intake.
Yeah, I think the point is you know.
But the mood and the emotional response too. I mean, try to be in a bad mood getting out of a cold plunge.
No, I mean, for me, the biggest ROI that I get from it is the state change, the mental state change that I experience from it. You know, you're not going to cold shower your way to a thin body, right? If you're overweight and obese, you got to focus on food. But I mean, as an adjunct, as something that can help to motivate you, right? And to perhaps give you the mental boost that you might need. I mean, I think it's great. Why not? It's another tool in the toolkit.
Yeah. So you get out of the shower and now you walk down the hallway, drink 10 ounces of, if you can get it, hydrogen water, and then go outside and expose your skin to sunlight. And first light especially, I mean, Huberman talks about this. There's all kinds of scientific evidence that, you know, the first 45 minutes of the day is a very special type of light. Right, first light, because as the sun's cresting the horizon, there's no UVA, there's no UVB. There's very beautiful, healthy blue light from the sun, not like the blue light you get from your screen on your phone, blue light from the sun. And wear minimal clothing. I mean, my neighbors think I'm a freak because I live in downtown Miami. So I'm out there every morning in my underwear and I'm like, they're like, freaking cult over there, you know. But
that's hilarious.
So I'll get up, I hit the cold plunge, but hit a cold shower, walk down your hallway or go outside, expose your skin to sunlight. If you can, put your feet on the ground, dirt, grass, sand, get grounding, earthing. That is a very real thing. We can discharge into the earth. You can actually change cell surface polarity by grounding. You can change the surface polarity on the surface of your red blood cells. You can cause them to separate and gain increased surface area to exchange with the outside environment. But you go and you sit down, you do I do a Wim Hof style breathing, so I certainly give it up to Wim Hof. Start with 3 rounds of 5 breaths, go to 3 rounds of 10, then 15, then 20, then 25, and eventually until you get to 3 rounds of 30 breaths with an extended breath hold in between. Because, you know, we've been led to believe that nitric oxide is the main vasodilator in the body. That's actually not true. Carbon dioxide is the main vasodilator in the body. So if you want to get a really strong vasodilation and then flood the blood with oxygen at no cost, do a round of 30 deep breaths and an extended breath hold. Keep your eyes closed, focus on your outside environment, get outside of your head. And then when you really have to breathe, take an obnoxiously deep breath in. Don't worry about it, whether it's through your nose or through your mouth and this side of your nose, that side of your nose. Just get the oxygen in. And then hold that breath as long as you can. Exhale and start again. And if you can add grounding, putting your feet on the surface of the earth and exposure to sunlight, in that 8 to 10 minute period, you have done more for your physiology than just about anything else that you could do in that short window. You've shocked the body, you've exposed it to sunlight, you've done a round of breath work, you've touched the surface of the earth, you've hydrated with 10 ounces of hydrogen water, and you tell me, after you do that for just 7 days, much less 30 days, you will never give it up again. It will be your drug of choice. Your body will chase it like a rat to cheese. And when you travel, you can take it with you when you're home, when you change time zones, when you're in New York, LA, Miami, Texas, doesn't matter, right? And that's what I love about that, because it doesn't require a gym, and it gives your body a routine, right? Our bodies crave consistency. And so just that is where I think everybody should start. And again, I'm not talking to the super woke biohacker. They're like, I go in 35-degree water and, okay, great, right? And then I have an infrared sauna. That's even better. I lay on a PMF mat. All that stuff is phenomenal. I'm just talking to the everyday layperson that doesn't know the difference between a stock and a rock or a cold plunge.
Well, all those modalities that you're talking about, like the PEMF mats and all that stuff, I mean, they're supplements. Yes. Essentially, for what you can essentially do for free, were you to take the initiative.
Exactly. And the sad thing is, because it's free and so readily available, I'm telling you, people just don't do it.
Yeah, you can't put a patent on sunlight.
Yeah, if I could, I would. I would patent sunlight, breath work, grounding, and cold showers.
You mentioned hydrogen water. What's the deal with that? I know it's something it's heavily marketed. Is there any real science there?
I think there's a lot of science to hydrogen water. I mean, I put a lot of the clinical studies on my. I personally think it's the healthiest water you can put in the human body. If you're traveling, maybe, you know, a good, you know, spring water like Mountain Valley would be my next choice, but because it has, you know, nutrients.
Minerals,
I mean,
I drink Mountain Valley spring water. I got
do you?
Delivered to my house. Yeah.
Oh, good. That's
probably
that's
what you're drinking.
Yeah. All right, great. I'm going to have some right now.
Yeah, love it. Mineral-rich spring water.
Yeah. So it's mineral-rich spring water. I think Mountain Valley is amazing. And but if you can afford it, you know, hydrogen water filtration system, you know, use a 4-stage RO filter to get all the microplastics and the fluoride and the chlorine and all out of your water, and then hydrogenator to add hydrogen back to the water. If you're traveling, you can use hydrogen tablets. I actually have a hydrogen water bottle. I have it with me. And I pour all of my water into this hydrogenator, and I click a button, and it hydrogenates the water. I think it's about $250. Probably.
But water is H2O. Isn't there hydrogen in any water you'll drink?
Yeah, but when you actually add hydrogen ions to the water, you feed the hydrophiles in your gut. You have excess hydrogen ions to neutralize free radicals. It's more hydrating. It's actually been proven to be better for recovery and athletic performance. Just like there's some marginal evidence that alkaline water will actually, you know, improve hydration, especially post intense exercise. It doesn't alkalize the blood, contrary to popular belief. That's just a marketing myth that alkaline water can actually change the pH of your blood. But you know, hydrogen water, in my opinion, is by far probably the most studied form of water in the world. I mean, there are more than 1,000 published clinical studies on hydrogen water. Just look up hydrogen water and Parkinson's, hydrogen water and metabolic syndrome, hydrogen water and gut health, and you'll see, you know, you'll find the studies.
Wow, I'm gonna look into it.
Yeah,
super interesting. I've heard you talk about red light.
I'm a huge fan of red light.
Yeah?
Huge fan of red light.
Tell me, because I have a Juve, and I don't use it super often, but when I do use it, I feel great afterwards.
So I actually did a deal with a manufacturer called Theralite 360, which creates a red light. They make a red light bed. In my opinion, by far the best red light bed on the market. It has 45,000 light diodes, and the lasers are made by Aspen Laser, and 45,000 light diodes, and it has all of the specific therapeutic wavelengths, the 680 to 720, the 810, and the 940 nanometers. And nanometers in light matter, right? We are very photovoltaic beings. We respond extraordinarily well to light. If you look at the research on photobiomodulation, which is red light therapy, and things like Parkinson's disease, inflammation, improved collagen, elastin, and fibrin, hair follicle restoration, inflammation, microvascular circulation, you will be astounded at the benefits of red light therapy. So I have a red light therapy bed that I lay in minimum 10 minutes a day. If I can, I try to do 20 minutes a day. But it has a very special feature in that certain wavelengths of red light, when they pass through the skin, they will penetrate the cell wall, and they'll go into the cell, and they'll actually penetrate the wall of the mitochondria, right, the powerhouse of the cell. And what they do when they penetrate the wall of the mitochondria, they dissociate a gas called mitochondrial nitric oxide from a very specific area in the Krebs cycle called cytochrome C oxidase. And cytochrome C oxidase is kind of like a one-armed man. It can either shake hands with oxygen or it can shake hands with nitric oxide, but it can't do both. So if I can get it to let go of nitric oxide, I can get it to grab oxygen. And if you know anything about mitochondrial function, there's a little motor inside the mitochondria. It's called the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. And what this does is every time it makes one revolution, it creates these units of energy called ATP. And if it doesn't have oxygen, it will make a revolution and create 2 units of energy. If it does have oxygen, it'll make the same revolution and create 36 units of energy. So imagine a 16-fold step up in ATP production. It's like taking a 100 horsepower motor and making it a 1600 horsepower motor. So what is the difference between 16 times more energy or 16 times less? The presence of oxygen. Well, if I could use red light to kick mitochondrial nitric oxide out and force oxygen to dock, now I'm upstaging trillions of mitochondria at the same time. It's literally like charging the batteries of the human body.
Whoa.
It is phenomenal. You get some of that benefit by exposure to sunlight, which is why I tell people, look, a red light therapy bed, really good one's going to cost you 120 grand.
Only with regard to sun exposure, only at certain points in the day, right?
Only at certain points of the day. That's why first light's so important. And
it's like dawn and dusk, pretty much, right?
Like dawn and dusk, exactly. But if you, and I've tested this, you know, the biohacker Ben Greenfield.
Yeah.
So
he's a homie.
Yeah. Oh, he's a homie. He's a homie of mine too. I absolutely love that guy.
He's a little nuts, but a sweet guy.
I got to tell you a funny story. Ben's going to kill me for telling this on a podcast. My wife is laughing over there. But Ben, here you go, buddy, under the bus.
He's coming in a few weeks. So
oh, is he? Yeah, he's coming to see me too, man. He's an amazing human. But so first time I meet him, right? I mean, I'm a huge fan of his, and we were texting all the time. He's like, "Hey, brother, I'm coming to Miami," and I'm like, I want to shoot a pod with you. I was like, dude, awesome. I was like, how long are you going to be there? He's like, 3 days. I was like, why don't you come stay with me? And he's like, great. So I'm like, awesome. You know, Ben Greenfield's coming to stay with me. So, and so I'm telling Sage, and she's like, that's that dude you have a man crush on? You're always talking about Ben Greenfield. I'm like, yeah, he's coming to stay with us. So he walks into the house. And he's got his blue light glasses on. He's got a red light thing around his neck. He's got all his bags. He's got his grounding sandals on. He drops his bags. We're all talking in the kitchen, me, my wife, my buddy David. And then all of a sudden, Ben squats down in my kitchen, drops his pants, and shoves a suppository.
What?
Up his ass. Yes.
He shows you.
Right up the keister, right in my kitchen, 5 minutes after walking into the house. And so my wife's like looking over like, does he have his pants down in my kitchen? And did you just shove something up his ass? He starts washing his hands. Now, meanwhile, he's just jamming with me. He's like, yeah, so maybe tomorrow we'll jump in the red light bed. And he's like washing his hands. And then all of a sudden,
that's a vibe.
He inverts himself on my refrigerator. He does a handstand on the refrigerator. So now he's just shoved a suppository up his ass and he's inverted on our refrigerator in our living room. He's been there 5 minutes. My wife looks at me and she goes, how long is he staying?
Damn.
And by the end of the time, she was like, I love that guy.
Don't homeschool your kids, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, so it was that's my Ben Greenfield story. But
that's hilarious.
The real point that I was going to make was that we stayed for a few days and we just, we really geeked out. Like we were pricking our fingers and putting it on slides and dark field in our blood after getting off a PMF map. But one of the things we did to test the red light bed was we used these nitric oxide strips. Because if you think about it, if that red light is truly dissociating nitric oxide, then the nitric oxide is going into the serum of the blood, right? And we should be able to pick it up. So we laid in the bed for 20 minutes, and a few minutes later, we would take these nitric oxide strips. First, we would do one right before we got in the bed, and it would be like this pale light pink. And then 10 minutes after getting out of red light, it was dark blood red Cabernet wine color.
Whoa! Just
saturated with nitric oxide.
This is from a finger prick or like a saliva test.
Saliva test. Yeah, it was saliva nitric oxide. So the only way to skyrocket your nitric oxide like that, if you're not supplementing during that period of time, is if it was actually being released from the mitochondria. And I was like, that is proof positive that the scientific, evidence is actually, repeatable.
Wow.
And that's when I went all in, really on red light, and we started manufacturing our own, and we increased the milliwatts of irradiance to make the bed more powerful. And now we make a phenomenal red light therapy bed.
Dude, that is fascinating. There was a study that I posted on Instagram. The study was published, I believe, August 2023. It might have been preprint. I don't remember actually, but the study was called "Optical Stimulation of Mitochondria Reduces Blood Glucose Levels," and what the study found was 15 minutes of red light exposure reduced blood glucose levels in an oral glucose tolerance test by 28% compared to placebo, which is just insane. Yeah, crazy to me. To me.
So, I mean, and therein lies, that's getting back to the basics too, because if you are exposing your skin to sunlight, you would have similar types of effect.
I'm the biggest skeptic, though. It just seems like science fiction that we could expose, because I think we're programmed to assume that the only photosensitive cells that we have in our body are in our eyes, right?
Not at all. No. We are majorly photovoltaic beings. And wavelengths of light have all kinds of positive effects in the human body. And I mean, just look up photobiomodulation Put the word and put any kind of condition you can think of.
I saw there was some
research on photobiomodulation. There's one on Parkinson's disease, which is very encouraging. Very, very encouraging. In fact, I just got a helmet from, I can't remember the name of the company, but it's a photobiomodulation helmet, very high intensity red light. And we're using it with an ALS patient that our clinic is treating. And I'm really excited for him because, some of these neuropathological diseases, they do not respond very well to conventional therapies. No. And if you can reduce the inflammatory response, help to heal the myelin, and restore functionality with red light, what is the downside to that? So I'm excited to kind of go through this case study with our clinical team and see what kind of impact we're going to have on this.
There are
patient.
So few options for people with neurodegenerative conditions as it is, something like that. If something like that were to work even a little bit, it's just it's such a shame. Earlier in our conversation when we were talking about neurology and just how desperate that situation can be, it reminded me of something that I heard a while back about how neurologists don't treat disease, they admire it. It's just a testament to how dire of a situation it is once you actually have that diagnosis.
Yeah.
The key is prevention. But the fact that there is evidence now slowly starting to come out about these safe, dare I say, natural interventions.
Yeah, no question. Resveratrol.
Really,
that actually changes the sort of elasticity, restores vascular laxity, and improves circulation. A lot of these are blood flow related. They're also nitric oxide related. Nitric oxide, contrary to popular belief, can be cytotoxic. Right? It's naturally found in the body, obviously, but it's not the main vasodilator. Supplementing with nitric oxide supplements is a terrible idea, right? To get a vasodilation or get a pump, because it becomes cytotoxic. It competes with oxygen in the mitochondria. Why would you want to downregulate the mitochondria by taking a nitric oxide supplement? Nitric oxide levels are also elevated in Alzheimer's. They're elevated in dementia. They're elevated in nearly all forms of autism. Right. So, this is a cytotoxic compound in high amounts.
But isn't it beneficial to consume nitrate-containing foods?
Yes, but not nitric oxide supplements, NO2 supplements, PDE5 inhibitors. These things can have significant downstream cellular consequences because they're causing a competition for oxygen, right, in the mitochondria. I was saying that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. Nothing is more true than that statement. Nothing. The presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. You try to find a disease etiological pathway that doesn't have its roots in a lack of oxygen or is not exacerbated by the absence of oxygen. All human beings die of the same thing, right? We all die of hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. That's the definition of death. So the question is, what causes it? A heart attack, a stroke, a bus, a cardiovascular event, gunshot wound. But the point is, when you can no longer sustain enough oxygen to maintain brain activity,
lights out.
That's it.
Damn. Well, this was super fun, Gary. Thanks for coming in. Yeah, I feel like we covered a lot of ground.
I feel like we did too.
Barely scratching the surface of your work and your research. What's next for you? What do you got going on? I know you're doing a ton of stuff right now. You've got your own podcast, and
so my wife and I wrote a book called Becoming the Ultimate Human. It'll be out before the end of this month. I launched a podcast called The Ultimate Human.
Love it.
It really has done quite well. And what's unique about it is I have guests on that have had a personal journey with me and my clinical team. Again, I'm not licensed to practice medicine, so I have clinical teams that practice alongside of me, but people like Steve Harvey and Stephen A. Smith and Steve Aoki, Dana White, that have had personal journeys with me. I'm using their, presence to show people the simplicity and how you could change your life with simple nutrients. And then I'm partnered with Grant Cardone in a health franchise called 10X Health. That's just doing extremely well. And I'm just trying to get the message out.
Love it, brother.
So I'm busy bee.
Love it. Well, keep up the good work.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.